Hey guys, welcome back to the workshop. So this week I'm going to just explore the subject of scrap steels versus known steels, and then we're going to get into a little bit of how we can find out what scrap steels are good scrap steels and what scrap steels aren't. So to start with, we've got everyday bog standard mild steel. Now, mild steel comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. This is actually some scrap from a scrap dealer called DeCandelo in Perth. Don't know what it was originally used for, came with the holes in it. Who knows, but it's definitely mild steel. This is flat bar that I bought from a local steel supplier for strapping for something, I can't remember what for. But this, I believe in America and most of the world, it's known as A36 or A37 mild steel, and it's unhardenable. It's normally around 0.2%-ish in carbon. Is no real way to tell, and alloy contents can be all over the place. It is not 1018 mild steel. 1018 mild steel is specifically a very low alloy, very low carbon steel, and that is specifically made for very specific things. So if you want a mild steel that is truly homogeneous in its alloy content, so if you're making guards or something like that for high quality knives and stuff like that, then you want 1018, but this is good for building tongs, building various other things. You know, everyone in the blacksmith's workshop has mild steel lying around. But as a bladesmith, you tend to come across other steels. So we'll start off with known steels. I've got a couple of examples here. This is 1084. It's pretty much available worldwide. The 10 denotes a simple carbon steel, and then the 84 denotes the percentage of carbon, which is 0.84% carbon. Now that's what 10XX denotes. Is the 10 is simple carbon, and then you've got your point value of carbon content. So 1045 is 0.45 and 1095 is 0.95. You get the idea. This is a really good starter steel. It's very, very easy to forge. It's very, very easy to heat treat in a simple forge. It's non-hypereutectoid, which is not something I'm going to get into in this video, but it is a simple steel. It is really good steel. It's very wear resistant, very, very tough. I love this stuff. It's expensive, but that's what you get. This is 01, actually sold as silver steel by formerly Bohler Uddelholm, which is now Voestal Alpine. I'll put the names of the companies down below. They're worldwide organizations. So this comes only in round stock as silver steel. A lot of Voestal Alpine distributors will not sell flat bar high carbon steel anymore because they found that it was not profitable. So they do still sell drill rod, which they sell as silver steel, which is 01. So if you've got the arm to forge out silver steel into whatever you want, then I recommend this stuff, because 01 is a great steel. It is a hypereutectoid steel, which means it can be a little finicky with heat treatment, but it is worth taking a look at if you can't find other known steels in your area. That being said, cost. These are very expensive. I paid $81 Australian, it's probably about 70 or 65 bucks American, for a meter of this, and this is 20 mil round, or 5/8 round. So it's a very expensive piece of material. It's not cheap. The 1084 is inch by quarter, inch and a half by quarter, and I paid $80 for a meter of this. So again, not cheap. In some countries it's cheaper than others. That's, it will depend on where you are in the world as to how much it costs you. But most of us don't have a massive budget to buy high carbon steel. So instead we go to the scrapyard and we find scrap. All kinds of scrap. Now, the most common scrap you'll find is leaf spring, or sometimes coil spring. So these two are normally the most common high carbon steels I see people using when they're getting into bladesmithing for the first time, or if they're making something that has to have an edge, like an axe or something, an insert. So these are a really good start. They're not always hardenable, however. We'll get to that later. But on average, most leaf spring and coil spring pieces are 5160 or equivalent. Like in Australia, they're SUP 9, which is an equivalent alloy to 5160. They're a good spring steel, they're very good for long blades, large choppers, that kind of stuff. They make a decent hunting knife, but obviously the lower carbon content, 5160, the last 2 points again denoting carbon content, mean that it's 0.6% carbon, so it's not going to be as hard as your 1095s and stuff like that. But it does make a usable knife, and I've known a lot of people who've made really good knives out of leaf spring, and it's totally usable. If you're going to get leaf spring, I would recommend going to a spring fitter, or someone who custom fits springs, or custom makes springs, for cars or trucks or whatever, and ask to go through their offcut bin. Now that's how I get a lot of my offcuts. And the reason I do that is because used springs can have microfractures. They can have stress fractures from constant use. Most of the time when people throw out old springs, it's because they've broken. So I get the offcuts from the fresh springs that they're fitting, because when you fit a spring, you cut the tabs off the end. They're normally over length and you cut them to size. And these have never been used. They're fresh off the press. They're fresh out of the gate. They have never been flexed. So therefore, they're not going to have any microfractures, hopefully. So much more secure in forging this stuff than used springs. Comes in a variety of shapes and sizes, as you will know, but very good starter. As far as testing goes, I will show you a couple of tests, but these are very tricky to pick out what's real and what's not. The other most common scrap steel that you see used is files. Now, files, common everywhere. They are not all made equal, however, and I'm going to show you in a test very soon how you can tell the difference between good and bad. But files, on average, again, are W1, W2, 1095, a very high carbon, low alloy steel, sometimes high in manganese like W1 and W2, to help with wear resistance because they are used to file away at metal, normally. I mean, unless you're using a wood rasp. You can also get Farrier's rasps. Actually, Farrier's rasps tend to be a bit lower carbon. Don't know why, specifically, but they do tend to be lower carbon. They tend to harden much less than metal files, so if you're looking for a hunting knife, I would suggest a metal file. Choppers and stuff like that are great out of rasps, Farrier's rasps. And as you guys know on my channel, I've made a sword out of one of these, and it works pretty well. So, yeah, Farrier's rasps and files are also a good source of scrap, and there's something to look out for when you're going through your local scrap sale, or if you've got a tip-op shop, what we call a reclamation center, where disposal places will sell on people's unused crap. So if you're ever wanting spare files and stuff, check out if you've got a local tip that does that. I'll keep that. And the last most common, there are a million different ways to find, steel. There are old saw blades and stuff like that if you're doing stock removal or Damascus, which I'm going to do an entirely different video on scrap Damascus, but saw blades, that being both handsaw and circular saw. You've also got plow tines and stuff like that, so, plowshares. Those are all going to be similarly 5160, SUP 9-ish. But then the other most common is bearings. Now this is quite a large bearing, but it's nowhere near as large as this one. I've got to be careful with my back how much I lift. But yeah, bearings come in all shapes and sizes. Obviously you've got these small bearings here, and then large bearings like this one, and they get even bigger. I won't bring over the bearing, but I'll bring over one of the balls, or one of the rollers. This is going to be featured in a video in the future, sometime after I get healed up. But this is a 4.5 pound roller bearing made of pure 52100. I know these are 52100 because these have been spectroscopically analysed by a company here in Western Australia called LMATS, and they do metal testing and stuff like that. So 52100, the bigger ones sometimes can be case hardened. This one's been tested, so I know it's not. But most bearing races and stuff like that are 52-100, which is a very difficult steel to forge. It's very red hard. It also cracks at high temperatures, but it hardens like the bejesus. It is the most wear-resistant steel I've ever worked with. I would not recommend it for a starting maker, but it is a fantastic steel for knives, for draw knives, for axe bits, you name it. It is fantastic for holding an edge. It's very wear-resistant. But that being said, we're going to get on to how to test this scrap steel for good quality, bad quality. And what we're going to start with is the grinder. Now, you don't have to use a fire ant like I'm going to use, my 2x72. You could use a bench grinder. It'll have the same results, and I might show the two. But what we're going to do is what's called the Spock Test, and you guys should be familiar with that. Anyone who doesn't know about this is going to find out that when you grind steel, it lets off a spark, and that's the iron filings, or the filings of the material, oxidizing in the air because they're so small and have such a large surface area, they rust instantaneously, and that rusting action happens so fast, and it's an exothermic reaction that it like superheats the metal and creates a spark. So what we're going to do is analyze those sparks, and what you can do is analyze those sparks visually to give you an idea of what the content of the material is. Normally the higher carbon, the shorter the spark, and then the lower carbon, the longer the spark, but I'll show you that right now. Okay, so we're going to start first off with a piece of A37, and then I'm going to show you a file. So I'm going to go straight from the piece of mild steel, standard mild steel, to a file. I won't shut off the grinder between because that'll just make the video longer. Just using a 3-inch contact wheel on my grinder. So, hopefully it was obvious that there was a significant difference between the length of the spark. There was also more flowering, more puffiness in the spark cloud on the file than there was on the mild steel. And that's also the carbons causing that, that small iron fragment to detonate because it's so high in carbon, which means that the carbon's trying to move out of the steel very quickly, and that creates that sparkler-like effect. So that's something to look for in steel. Now, the same thing happens with 52-100 or leaf spring. The big thing with leaf spring and 5160 in general is that it's actually a very low spark steel. The other thing that I've got here, hopefully here, yep, there we go, is some M4 tool steel, which I use for some of my neck knives and my engravers, as this is one of my engravers. M4 is an incredibly hard steel, but it's also very low spark. So I'm going to show you what those look like compared to a file. And even though these actually harden to the same, well, this actually hardens to the same level as a file, it won't spark the same.
Now the leaf spring. $52-100. Number 5.
So, what should be pretty obvious is that the 52-100 was the one that sparked closest to the file. And that's because they're similar in carbon content, very high carbon content in order to be very wear resistant. The higher the carbon content, the harder the steel gets. It's also more brittle. The leaf spring, if you were watching, has very long sparks and sparse flowers. It's still got more flowers than mild steel, which if you go back on the video you'll be able to see that, but it does tend to look a little more like mild steel than file steel does. So it's not as easy to tell 5160 or good 5160 from mild steel. Spark test isn't always the most reliable method of finding out which steel is the best. I'm going to move on to the next test, which I find more reliable, especially for files. So here I have two files. This one I've previously tested. You can see I snapped the bottom off it. But they're both about exactly the same dimensions, same thickness, same width, same file cut on both of them. They are different makers, and I actually for certain know that this one here that I've broken the bottom off is a low quality file. But when I spark test them, watch the sparks and you'll see very little difference.
Good file.
Bad file. So, because they sparked almost identically, we should assume that they are the same alloy, yes? Well, not entirely, because I know for a fact that this one is a very low quality alloy, or it's actually not an alloy at all, and I'm going to show you something about that in a minute. But this one, which is not the same file I just spark tested, that one is actually put aside for a different project. This one is from the same manufacturer, however. It's, slightly different cross section because it's half round. But I know for a fact that this one is good quality steel, and I'll get into manufacturers in a bit. But what we're going to do is we're going to take the good file. You can snap off the section near the tang, or you can snap the bit off next to the tip, doesn't really matter. You don't want to go right on the tang because those are normally softened. And I'm going to put a bit of juice on the clamping, and because my back is bad I'm going to use a cheetah bar. And what we're going to do is give it a hook. That's how a good file should break. It actually shattered so well that it snapped into 3 pieces. That's sometimes a risk. If I'd put the bar a bit further down towards the vise, then it probably wouldn't have shattered into 3 pieces, but the reverberation caused it to shatter. But we had a perfectly clean break, and what I'm going to do is up in this corner here, I'm going to show a macro of the cross-section, hopefully. If I can't, basically it is completely grey throughout. It is all one colour and the grain size is all identical. It looks almost like matte plastic, like whenever you've broken plastic, it looks just like that. So that I can tell is homogeneous and fully hardened steel. And you noticed how easy that was. I barely bent it, and it just shattered. And that's why you don't whack things with files. This file, on the other hand, I'm going to stick it in the vise. The cheetah bar. Oops. Doesn't go over. I'm going to stick it in the other way. That's alright. Slightly larger cross section, but that shouldn't make too much difference. Now, that's very telling. It's broken. It's actually broken in the vise, but it's still connected by tendrils. And it did break into 3 pieces, but that was because the pipe was hinging on the piece. But again, up in this corner here, I'm going to try and show a macro of the grain cross-section. The outside is all of that homogeneous, smooth grey, but then the inside is a slightly darker grey, and there are much larger grains, and it almost looks like fibres that have been pulled apart. That is a case-hardened file. Now, files have been case-hardened for centuries. Ever since files were invented back in, the early Iron Age, they figured out ways to case harden using bone compounds and ceramic insulation and stuff like that. All kinds of crazy stuff. But case hardened files are still in use today, especially in manufacturers from India, China, Pakistan, that kind of stuff, and cheaper manufacturers, even based in the US, based in Australia, based in Brazil, based in all of those places. The cheaper manufacturers, the non-name brand manufacturers, tend to case harden their files, and there's a reason for it. It's because it's cheap. They could buy a mild steel in bulk, and then they case harden it using a compound, and it costs them about half the price and gives you a lower quality tool because they can't guarantee the high hardness and wear resistance of a fully hardenable alloy. So, if I was to forge this into a blade, I might, if I'm very lucky, forge the blade close enough to shape that there is still a tiny bit of carburized material on the edge. But decarburization during forging, which is the loss of carbon through the constant heating and repeated loss of carbon through scale and stuff like that, would probably mean that I'd end up with a bar of mild steel in a knife shape. So this will not make a good tool at all. Whereas this, the homogeneous file, will. Now you can do that with any kind of hardened material. Obviously with leaf spring it's incredibly difficult. So what do? What can we do? We have a forge, don't we? So what you do is forge yourself a cross-section of the material you want to use. So say it's leaf spring or something like that. I can't swing a hammer right now, so I won't. But you forge a cross-section of the material you think is good carbon steel, heat it up in your forge until it's bright orange, way past critical temperature, and quench it in water. Do as an aggressive a quench as you possibly can. We're not trying to work out what the critical temperature range of the steel is at this point, and I'm going to get into using scrap steels in another video. All we're trying to do is find out if it's hardenable. Get that small cross-section, so I'm saying, maybe 6 mil by 10 mil, or even less if you can get it, down to 3 mil by 10, so that's a quarter inch or an eighth of an inch by 5/8 or half an inch or 3/8. So you can quench it and then snap it, and if it snaps, that doesn't tell you what the critical temperature is, that doesn't tell you what the proper quenching for that is, but it will tell you whether it's hardenable or not. If it bends, it's no good. If it snaps, it's good. That is the ultimate way to test if you've got a good scrap steel or a bad one, is purely the quench and snap test. All other tests, the spark test, the snap test in the vise when it's hardened, this one only really works on files, and it's really good for files because if you do the forge and snap, there is a chance that you've still got case hardened material. So just snap your files when you're testing them. But everything else, forge a small cross section of it or cut a small cross section of it. If you've got your leaf spring, this thing's quite thick. It's about 8 mil thick. If you clip off a section of that, heat that up, quench it in water, snap it in the vise, you'll be able to tell whether that's hardenable almost instantaneously. But yeah, that is one of the easiest way to tell which steel is going to be good for using with edged tools. So hopefully that was helpful. I've found that I've used this technique a lot in my career as a bladesmith. I love using reusable materials. I love recycling old stuff into new stuff. That's where I get my my jollies from, is recycling old, unused stuff that people have thrown away and turning it into something beautiful and awesome that we can then go on to use for another generation. That being said, if you are making custom knives for people and you want to make the best knives you possibly can, you need to go with known steel. I don't think there's anyone out there who is arguing that. I would hope there isn't. I would hope that no one's arguing that file steel is better than store-bought 1084, because it's not. At the end of the day, knowing your alloy, knowing what your temperatures are, what the nose chart looks like, what the hardening chart looks like, is way better than not knowing. Like, even no matter how many tests you do, unless you're getting it spectroscopically analyzed, you're not going to get a solid performance. Now, as I said, most of my scrap steel is spectroscoped. It is tested to tell me exactly what material I'm working with, and the reason for that is because that way I know how to heat treat it properly, which means that I can reuse the materials that I'm using a lot easier and a lot better than other people can. That being said, there are a lot of arguments online about known steels being better than found steels, and only use known steels, and anyone who uses found steels is completely useless and should throw in their bladesmithing badge immediately. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think if you want to make stuff out of old stuff, do it, man, please. Or lady. I love that. I love the fact that we're not laying waste to society by throwing piles of perfectly good steel in the trash. There's more than enough to go around. If you're going to do that, don't advertise your work as being made from XY material unless you absolutely know that it is. I can say that something made from the bearing races that I have is 52100 because I have the spectroscopic analysis on paper. But if I made a blade out of that bearing race without getting it tested, I would say on the knife, made of a bearing race. So don't be dishonest. Try not to mislead your customers, especially if you're just getting into the craft. I understand that it gets more clicks to say, it's a super steel of some kind, but at the end of the day, you've got to be honest in yourself, and you're not helping the community of bladesmiths, blacksmiths, by misrepresenting your work, by telling your customers it's something it's not. But with all that being said, again, I hope this helped you. I hope that you guys use these techniques and let me know if they helped. If you want to hear more about these kinds of techniques and stuff like that, this is the kind of video platform I'm going to be using for the next couple of weeks while I heal. Unfortunately, I can't swing a hammer because of my back issues. I probably shouldn't be doing half the stuff I was doing today. But with that being said, I'm going to have to go inside now. I would like to say a quick thank you to all my patrons. My top patron, Jared Russell, he is still the most amazing person on the planet. But Nathan, Andy, Kine, Rich Miller, and Braden Fankel, you guys are all fantastic people. Thank you so much for keeping me alive during this period where I'm not working at all, almost. I'm trying to get some blades done. There will be some stuff on my Etsy store very soon. I've got a hammer up there just now. But yeah, I am trying to work through, and if you want to hear from me, please feel free to email me at samtownsbladesmith.com, samtownsbladesmith@gmail.com. You can also find me at samtownsbladesmith on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to support the channel, which I really do appreciate, especially in this hard time right now, not required of you, please don't feel that I'm trying to push you into it. But if you do want to support the channel, I have a Ko-fi, which is a single-time donation platform of multiples of 3. And then I also have my Patreon, which will both be linked in the description below if you want to go check those out. There is sometimes some behind-the-scenes stuff on my Patreon that other people don't get to see. There will be behind-the-scenes for this video because I screwed up a few times. But yeah, guys, I hope you are having a fantastic week, and I hope the week ahead is fantastic. I'm going to be uploading another video on Friday, and I will have a live stream on Saturday again. Don't know what I'll be doing, but it'll be something. I hope to see you there. Have a fantastic week. I will see you in the next video.